two, one.
Hello and welcome to Forensic Intent. We are so glad to have you. I'm Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. I'm Scott. Thanks for being here, and it's nice to be back.
Yes, exactly. And today we are going to wrap up the Sarah Boone coverage, as the title said. I bet a lot of you watched the rest of that trial, and I'm going to be curious to hear in the comments if you guys kind of thought one thing when Sarah testified and another as the trial moved forward. And so we're going to just kind of talk about the different phases of the trial, what happened, because it was far from boring and it was very quick. I didn't you think, Scott, it was going to be like a 3-week trial like they said?
I did think it would be longer. I was kind of surprised it went as quickly as it did. Honestly,
Ye
yes.
Yes, exactly. I mean, and they maybe it's just because of her lawyers. Maybe because she had actual lawyers and wasn't representing herself, it went a lot faster.
Well, and I think that they didn't have as much time to really prepare either, and I think that maybe factored into it a little bit because they only had like less than a little over a month, I guess, to prepare.
I can't
So,
even put myself in their shoes in that way. I mean,
yeah.
think about how long sometimes it takes to prepare for a big exam or study, or how long the prosecutors had and how much evidence they had to look at. I mean, that would be very difficult.
And honestly, Rebecca, I don't know if it was a thing with the judge. I'm not really sure, and I don't want to put speculation out there, but sometimes I just wonder if maybe the judge was just like, "Let's get this thing done because we've gone through 8 lawyers already and here we go with another one. Let's get this thing rolling."
Yes, probably, and because I watched some of those hearings, and that is true, but the problem is that the defense asked for a short continuance, and the state didn't oppose it, but the
Mhm.
judge was so set on, like you said, with the trial, and so I think that's maybe, what it came down to, and I think it's gonna be a large appeal issue, and it worries me because no lawyer, should have 45 days. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
not enough time.
It is not for a trial of this magnitude. I mean, they'd lead it at least double that, if not more. I mean, some of these trials preparations take months and months to actually come to trial.
And 3 I mean, a 3-month continuance would not have been bad. It would have just been right after the holidays,
Right.
and because the state didn't oppose it, and you know what's funny? She almost got that continuance anyways, like, because, of the hurricane, they actually had to push it out 1 week, so it would have been on October 7th.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree.
So she at least they at least got an extra week, although, I mean, tragic circumstances to get an extra week, and they probably did not wanna think about the trial. I'm guessing, they probably wanted to deal with hurricane prep, etcetera.
Yeah, that was probably exactly what was going on. So we have
Yes,
a lot to
yes,
we have a lot to talk about today.
that's right. So you guys, we're gonna start with Sarah's testimony. I mean, obviously, we're not gonna go through it in detail, and you guys saw it and
Right.
probably wouldn't want us to go through it in detail, but, I have to say, it was it was really interesting, and by the end, I found myself feeling, like she was also a victim, just hearing about the abuse and seeing some of the
Mhm.
photos. What did you think?
I think that there's no question in my mind that she was a victim, Rebecca. I mean, the photos spoke for themselves. I think this was like kind of the typical, unfortunately, really toxic domestic relationship where both parties were guilty on both sides of doing some things.
Yeah, and I didn't expect to feel that way toward her. I mean,
Hmm.
yes, I always feel empathy for abuse victims, but her crime was cruel, and so I just figured maybe she was exaggerating the abuse, or and that sounds really terrible to say it that way, but because she had changed her story so many times, I just didn't know what to believe. But once I saw some of that evidence, I thought, and once we heard from her expert, I thought maybe she really did have some fear, and then also mix that with the alcohol. I could kind of see how manslaughter could have been where the jury went.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see some of the jurors might have considered that. I think the big thing was, and we'll talk about it later when we talk about closings, but I felt like the elements of the crime were met that needed to show second degree murder. That's kind of where I was at with everything. Um, I can see how some of the jurors would maybe disagree with that, most definitely, but I felt the elements were there.
When I was looking at court observers, X accounts as they were,
Hmm.
posting live from the courtroom, several of them during her testimony had said some of the jurors were very moved. That was their impression. And so that's also why I thought, oh, it might be manslaughter. And again, how could you not be moved seeing those pictures and hearing about some of that? So that's kind of where I was at then. Um,
Hmm.
although I will say her narcissism was on some display. And I'll make a disclaimer. We're not diagnosing her. I'm That's just my opinion, of course, and I want to speak respectfully of so but when she said that she was an outstanding mother, she was excellent at everything, and she was a straight A student, I just thought, "Ooh, does she know where she is and how that might actually backfire?"
Exactly. Yeah. And the bottom line is you never know with the jury and what they're thinking until you find out in the end. But yeah, I definitely think that her narcissistic behavior probably played into some of that too. I almost felt like there were times where she actually had justified her own actions. And
Good
and
point.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
And I thought that, she talked about, Brian and a little bit and also didn't paint herself in the best light. She said she ignored some of his phone calls because she just said he blew up her phone to make sure she was gonna pick up their kid. Well, of course he did. I mean, that makes, perfect sense to me.
That makes sense to me as well. Yeah. I can definitely see that.
I wouldn't as a parent, want, to be like, "Someone's leaving my kid," and just be uncertain, and so but she sort of said, "I'm just gonna ignore his calls until I'm ready to answer them," and to me, that just did not, make her look like an outstanding mother.
No, not at all. And that's typical, unfortunately, of some of that narcissism that we were just talking about. They just look at things through a different light.
Actually, I would say that that might be more attributed to alcoholism,
Hmm.
because he said in an interview, her ex-husband said that she would sometimes forget, and, maybe because she would be too hungover, and so
Right.
I wonder if it was, maybe more alcoholism, just chronic alcohol abuse.
I mean, it certainly could be. I mean, there's no question. I mean, we heard that in the trial that they drank and they drank a lot and in copious amounts during the day or the afternoon or the evening rather. So, I mean, it certainly could factor in 100%.
Did you, think I was surprised, but maybe this is just how alcoholics are. I was very surprised that Sarah, uh, basically would not she had such a hard time, and her lawyer kept asking her in different ways, "Were you drinking too? How much did you drink?" And she kept saying, "I didn't drink a lot. I didn't drink much. No, no, I wasn't intoxicated." And then she kind of finally had to admit that she was, but she had such a hard time doing that.
Well, I think that's typical sometimes. I mean, I dealt with a lot of those similar issues when I was in law enforcement,
Right.
dealing with people with heavy alcohol abuse or heavy drug use, and a lot of them don't want to admit it, and some of them honestly do believe that, because they've been doing it for so long and they've been functioning, and for so long, they don't sometimes feel like they're really out of control.
Yeah, yeah, I guess that's true. What did you
Yeah.
think of, the cross that the state did?
I thought I have to think back for a minute. I mean, I thought it was good. Overall, I thought that the state did a very good job and presented the case very well. Both in their opening statements and also in the cross and just in general, I felt like they did a very good job. So I felt like they were well prepared, and yeah, I didn't have a problem with it at all. Just kind of talking in generalities. That is what I'm doing here. But
Sure,
I thought it
sure.
was good.
I actually thought that they could have asked a lot more questions that they
Hmm.
did not ask, and, maybe that was because they just felt like she was just going to continue to lie or change her story, but it just
Hmm.
seemed like they left a lot on the table. It was very short, for a cross with so much evidence. And so I just was surprised. And then when they had her get down and do the suitcase thing, I was like, oh no, no, this could backfire on you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I was a little nervous on the suitcase thing too, but yeah,
And at one point she said something like, "Do you want me to demonstrate with the bat?" No, no,
I
we do
remember that. Yep,
so
yep.
oh, so that was really interesting as far as her testimony went. And then I was I do you guys also remember this about the rebuttal case started off with a bang because her expert got into a little bit of trouble. So basically what happened was her expert changed some of their opinions just slightly and didn't notify the defense before she was going to testify. And so the judge conducted what's called a Richardson hearing. And what that means is basically, was there a discovery violation and was it willful or was it inadvertent? And what he found is that yes, they did commit a discovery violation, but it was inadvertent. But that's a dangerous thing on appeal, as we saw with the Alec Baldwin case, although it didn't get that far, if the state did not include that. And so they had a long, long time of arguments, and finally the judge's remedy was to let Mr. Owens do a sort of on the fly deposition to figure out what opinion she had, which it sounded like it was very difficult, but the judge was trying to protect the record from the appeal. And so what do you think of that, Scott? What's your reaction to that?
Well, I can't believe I missed that whole thing, Rebecca. That's when we were having issues with power and so on and so forth. And so there was parts of the trial that I missed. So
Yeah.
it's kind of hard for me to really make an intelligent comment on that one, to be perfectly honest. I just didn't see it.
I know. It was really surprising, though, that the state did not correct that with the defense. As far as I thought it was really avoidable, right? That it could have been because the judge could have just thrown that expert out. Like he could have just said, "Well, it's
Certainly.
that's one of the remedies," but he didn't do that. But it could have been done.
Yeah, it could have been. And, I don't know why they didn't do that either, but you're right. I mean, it's definitely could have been done.
He said because it was kind of a really extreme measure, which I agree with, but that expert kind of played hide the ball even on the stand, I thought. And so she was kind of shady and then just seemed nervous after that and just I don't think she had a huge impact because she had changed her opinion, so then she had to kind of at first she said that no, there was no PTSD and there was really not battered spouse, and then I guess she said she needed to think about it and maybe there was, and so it
Mhm.
sort of ended up being a little wishy-washy from her. So, it was really interesting how that played out. No one expected it to kinda go that way. That was sort of a bombshell right in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your thought on the battered spouse? Do you want to talk about that,
Oh,
on
yeah,
that
good idea.
defense? Yeah.
Yes, it's hard. I think I would have gone with a different defense. I was
Mhm.
listening to a video with Peter, AKA Lawyer You Know, and he was saying maybe more of a of an accidental defense, which would have hit manslaughter better. I was drinking, I passed out, I didn't mean to leave him in the suitcase, I just fell asleep. That fit
Mhm.
with her story better to me. What do you think?
Well, I think that I could definitely see that. I think that the battered spouse defense, we were talking earlier, there's no question in my mind that there was some domestic violence perpetrated towards her as well. I mean, the
Right.
the photographs and everything clearly showed that in the trial. So that's not a question to me. What I felt was the issue with that is, yes, okay, she was a battered spouse,
Mhm.
but at that time, you guys, it really didn't apply in my opinion, because there was clearly, I mean, you can make the argument that she was kind of knew his patterns and was foreseeing that it could turn into something like that, which is
Mhm.
what I think the defense was trying to go down that road, but it didn't work. But honestly, there was really nothing there that night that would fit for battered spouse syndrome to me.
What the judge said was it just has to be a scintilla, so the tiniest of evidence, and so her testimony is evidence, and she said that while he was in the suitcase, he said, "I'm going to end you," or something like that, and
Right,
so
right.
she viewed that as the threat, and so that was essentially, I guess, combined with his fingers, that scintilla of an overt act, if you will.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't
Because
know if I
legally, if he wouldn't have allowed it in, think about it like this, that would have been a huge issue for her on an appeal because several experts had already said they thought she had it.
Mhm. That's true. Yeah, you're right on that.
So the
I
judge
just didn't
never wants to take away, sorry, I don't wanna cut you off. The
no, you're
judge
good. Go
never
ahead.
wants to take away, um, a defendant's defenses, because if they do that, then on appeal, the jury might say, "Wait a second." For example, there was a case of a baby being left in a hot car, and the defense wanted to bring in an expert where the parent said, I guess there's some kind of a syndrome where a parent actually can forget, which I did not know, but the judge said that's bogus, and then the defendant got a new trial.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
So I
Yeah,
think judges are always mindful of that.
say that again.
I think judges are always mindful of that.
I think they have to be. Yeah. I mean, they have to be fair and mindful, obviously.
Yeah, and in that case, I think it's what's a bit more favorable to the defense, obviously. There are times when it's the light most favorable to the state and sometimes the other. Just one other question I had about Sarah's testimony before we wrap that portion up, and just the trial in general. I thought it was smart, and you can tell me what you think, that the judge every day, though, would do the colloquy and say to her, "Are you satisfied with your lawyers? Are you on board with the defense?" Just so that she couldn't say later that she wasn't.
Absolutely, and I think you're spot on with that. I noticed the very same thing, and obviously the judge was doing that to avoid any issues down the line. So, and he did a good job with that, and she was very clear, Rebecca, as you know, the entire time that yes, I'm very confident in what my lawyers are doing, and so yeah,
I'd like to know how James Owens was able to I can't think of a better word than corral her to go along with it because she, remember, had 8 other lawyers and could not get along with them, did not agree with their stance. So I don't think anyone's asked him that, and maybe he can't talk about that, but it would be interesting to hear.
it would be interesting to hear. I'm not sure he'd go there either, but yeah, I did find it very interesting that, you know, out of all of the lawyers that she went through, he was the one. And, you know, maybe she was just at a place too where she realized, okay, I just need to step up now and, you know, accept the next lawyer that comes my way that wants to defend me because there's been so many. I think she
Yeah.
realized that she probably could not defend herself well, obviously.
She didn't even know what an objection was, if I remember
Exactly.
correctly, so
Yeah.
you're right, I think that's true. So, let's move to the body cam portion of this, which was wild. I mean,
Yeah.
so many calls, so many 911 calls, so many calls to the police.
Mhm.
I'll start off by saying kudos to the police. I mean, wow, they were patient, they were kind, they were professional. I thought they did an excellent job.
I thought they did a great job as well. And, you know, I can speak about my own career on that. It is so common that you respond to the same residents for the same issues, for the same domestic issues over and over and over and over again. I did it a
Mm.
lot in my career. And clearly with Sarah and with George, it was the same situation. I mean, they were there, the police were there in May, they were there in June, they were there twice in June, I believe. They were
Mhm.
there in August, they were there in September. And it was the same scenario, Rebecca. And it's really kind of sad to see because, you know, I tweeted you or texted you that earlier that it was really kind of the textbook situation that I've seen with a really toxic, dysfunctional relationship. And it was all shown on body cam. And, you know, so many times Sarah really didn't want to do anything, but the police are in a situation where they have to do something. You know, if there's been an injury, if there's clearly been an assault, in most states, you have to make an arrest. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, that's what they did.
So why, do you think that, well, let me ask you, I guess I'll start here.
Mhm.
when you had that in your career several times, let's just say couple A and B, were you like, "Oh, here's couple A and B again?" I
Mhm.
mean, how did you sort of feel when you'd see that come up?
Well, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, as police officers, you get to know
Mhm,
who the repeat offenders are,
mm,
and you just get to know who they are, and so it's not a surprise at all when you're going to their house 3 or 4 times, sometimes a night for the same
mm,
situation. Not uncommon at all. And yet still, you have to treat it objectively. You
mhm,
know, you have to treat it fairly. You have to make an assessment of, has there been a clear assault here?
mhm.
Does somebody need to go to jail tonight? Or like here in Oregon, we're allowed to say, okay, if there hasn't clearly been an assault, or it's just kind of a mutual thing, but there's no injuries or anything like that, we have the authority to tell them, you know, you one of you needs to leave. One of you
Okay.
needs to get a hotel, you need to go stay with a friend, whatever. And that happens a lot here.
Mm.
And if you come back tonight and we come back tonight, then somebody is going to go to jail. So it's a fine line. And you have to be very careful with that though, because if you mess up basically, and there has been an injury, or if somebody
Mm.
comes back and then, you know, there is an injury later on, it's a big deal. So
Was that hard to not make judgments? I mean, in some ways you had to make judgments, so but hard to not make judgments about who was right and who was wrong in those scenarios? Or, I mean, just to because to say objective, that had to be hard to walk that line.
yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah, how do I answer that question? So it was difficult at times. When you go into a situation like that, you have to look at both sides, obviously,
Mhm.
and see, you know, who clearly is the aggressor here, or is there even an aggressor? You
Yeah.
always interview them separately. There's generally at least 2 or 3 officers on a scene for something like that, and you always interview them separately, and then you compare stories and see where that goes. So, yeah, I mean, in answer to your question, it can be really hard. It can be hard to not judge as police officers too, because you're there all the time.
Right.
And, you know, you kind of get sick of it sometimes because it's the same thing, you know, several times a week, but you have to treat it fairly.
And I saw on the body cam at one point, Sarah, it looked like she was, like, jumping for joy that the same officers came back, and another time she wanted to hug one of them, and I was like, "Oh,
Good.
that's all very difficult."
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember he was kind of taken back by that. And she tried to put a bigger hug on him. And he's like, no, that's enough. That's enough. And he kind of tried to walk away. And I mean, domestics, Rebecca and chat room, they're tough. I mean, they're one of the hottest things that you can go to as a police officer because you never know what's going to happen once you get there. I have been to domestics before where clearly the male was the aggressor, and when he's taken into custody and put in handcuffs, the female goes nuts and
Mm,
sometimes tries to attack the officers and tries
mm.
to convince them not to take him into custody. And you never know what's going to happen. You have to be very, very careful. And that's why so many officers are injured on domestics, because they're very unpredictable.
So, also, why, do would you say I notice when I watch some of these domestic violence things, some officers are really calm and some just yell, and I just sometimes think, "Well, that's not going to de-escalate the situation here." The calm thing would seem better to me, that calm sort of personality and attitude, but is that just sort of based on, say, an officer's individual personality?
It can be both. It can be the officer's personality, but it can also be assessing the situation. And there's a fine line. I mean, you can be as calm as you want to be, but if it's not helping the situation and it's not de escalating and they're not listening and
Mhm.
it's still very heated, sometimes as an officer, and we saw that one officer in one of the videos do that to Sarah. He yelled across the parking lot to her and said, you know, just be quiet. You're
Right.
interfering. And anytime you keep talking to me, you're interfering. Sometimes you have to do that because um, there's a saying in law enforcement, and I don't want to sound derogatory, but you know, sometimes you have to speak their language, and
Mm,
sometimes when it's hot like that and they're
yeah.
going crazy, you have to get a little crazy too and settle them down, or they won't listen.
Oh, interesting. I never
Yeah.
thought about it like that, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not in every case, obviously, but
Sure.
and you're correct. I mean, in my experience as an officer on domestics, you do get much further treating both parties properly and trying to get them just to stay calm and give you the story, but sometimes that doesn't always work.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, that makes a lot of sense. This was probably one of my favorite parts of our conversation today because I said to Scott earlier, I'm really interested to hear your take on the body cam
Mhm.
and the 911 just because he has some real life experiences that I don't and that some of you may or may not have and so it's really valuable to understand and again, we talked a little about this last week, but in this movement of defund the police or it's I just think police are very misunderstood with stuff like this.
I think that it's gotten, worse through the last 5 to 10 years as well.
Yeah,
Police are much more misunderstood now. Um, how do I wanna say this? So, clearly nobody wants to see the police coming to their door because usually if the police are on their way, there's something going on. Um, but at the same time, they're very needed, and yet it's become very easy for people to really hate on the police and be angry with the police. And all you really hear with regard to policing are the bad things that happen. You never really hear about the good things that happen in the media and what have you.
right.
And so people have really there's a lot of factors that go into it. I mean, people have become very judgmental of the police, and it's very easy to blame them for the bad police work that's been done. And there has been bad police work out there lately in some of these cases that we've talked about in the past, but not all of it's that way.
Yeah, I mean, think about Karen Reed. There's some bad police work. Richard
Sure,
Allen, I would say there's some bad police work, and some of the
sure.
shootings we've seen, not all, but some for sure. I think there's some bad police work, and you're right. It just kind of puts a stain on everyone, which is not fair. And but it's the way it works, and then people sort of stereotype that all police are X, Y, or Z, and that's just not the case.
It's not the case at all. I mean, Sonia's making a really good comment right here. When there is a problem, everyone calls the police first.
Yep.
Which is true, but it's very easy for many people to say, well, I don't like the police until they need them, basically, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
And moving on into the case a little more, I was just disturbed. There's no better way to say it. With the videos that the state showed, there were various video clips, if you guys remember, and she was taunting George. She was just treating him like an animal. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. And I think you know how I feel on that, Rebecca, but I want to talk about it a little bit. I mean, in my mind, that is where it crossed over
Yeah,
from manslaughter to second degree murder.
yeah.
Because in order to show those elements, you have to have that depraved mind that is clearly there, that you had that element has to be met. And I could see where if she had not taunted him and not basically all the expletives she said to him and laughed at him and mocked him when he was clearly not able to breathe, I could have seen the jury looking a little bit more, well, maybe this was just manslaughter and she just got screwed up and she left him there. But when she crossed that line with doing those things that were shown in the video and all the stuff that was shown, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I was not surprised at all that they went with second degree murder based on what I saw there.
Yes, I agree with you 100% because I was in that camp. I was okay, manslaughter after her testimony, but once I saw those videos, I had to remind myself that
Mhm.
she deserves a fair trial, that I want the jury to be fair and not let it affect them like it's affecting me because it really made me dislike her. But like and dislike are not supposed to be elements that are considered. I mean, they are often, sadly, but they're not supposed to be. But in that sense, it was hard for me to take my emotions out of it because I just felt so bad for George. And and she just was treating him so terribly, and it went beyond just her being drunk. There were a couple of the videos where I thought, "Okay, she's just drunk, he's just drunk, that's what they're doing." But then the ones where it wasn't the case, there was that one where she filmed him and he was sleeping, I think, like, near the stairs or something, because she wouldn't let him sleep in their room, and I just thought, "Oh, that's so sad."
Yeah, I agree with that. Sorry, I was looking at a comment here too.
Oh, yeah.
Sonia just made another comment. She said also the bat really did her in, and
Mm,
all the contusions that he had, those things all factored in. And
yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, I clearly understand. And like I said, I was not surprised with the second degree verdict.
But that's where I think it changed, like you said. I think it could have been manslaughter had they not had those videos. I mean, essentially, Sarah was her own worst enemy in this case by all the things she recorded. I think she,
Mhm.
in her delusional way, thought it was going to be fine. People would see it her way, not realizing that no one was going to see that her way. Everyone was going to be, her lawyer looked disturbed with those videos, rightly so.
Absolutely. And her lawyer has come out and has said, I really wish that she had taken the plea. I asked her to take a plea and I felt that was in her best interest and she just was not having any of that. I think you're right. I think in her own delusional way, I think she probably was pretty shocked that she was found guilty. I don't think she expected that. But I mean, that's the
The
difference
rest of us knew.
between yeah, that's the difference between delusional and not delusional, I guess.
Right, yeah, I suppose you're right about that, and basically, I think the other really disturbing thing that all the experts identified was that they showed that picture where she ripped up the birth certificate, his birth certificate, and that also really stuck with me because the experts basically said one of the things that happens with battered spouse is that somebody has control of things like your birth certificate, your identity, and if they hold those hostage or destroy them, you have to get new ones, you can't cash your checks. There's a lot that goes on with stuff like that.
Well, and do you remember in part of the video, I'm sure you saw it, where she was yelling at him, they were fighting, and she was saying to him something to the effect of, "I paid for your birth certificate or I
Right.
did what," yeah, and I don't care if your name's on it or not, it's not yours because I helped you get these things. I
Yes, I
thought that
do.
was very interesting.
And then wasn't there a body cam video, where the police were like, "Just give us the birth certificate," and she was like, "I hid it," and then they were like, "Okay, where'd you hide it?" And they
Yeah.
were looking through the bushes.
Yeah, that was a very interesting part to me because what I saw in that part of the video where she was standing by the hedges and she's like, I don't know, I put it in here somewhere. She clearly was not going to assist them and try to help them find that birth certificate. She didn't give a darn about that at all, in my opinion, and was just going to make them do the work. But I thought that was very interesting.
What did you make of the 911 calls that happened? I mean, not so much the body cam, but just, when they played the audio. I those were really interesting to hear because some of them went on for 10 plus minutes.
A lot of them were the typical 911 calls that I've heard in situations like that, though. She was intoxicated, number one, so you have to factor that in. That's a given.
Good point.
So she wasn't making a lot of sense on the calls to begin with, and then she was just kind of all over the place. She'd be yelling and screaming, and then she'd be very calm. And then when she was asked, "Do you want to press charges?" she wouldn't necessarily answer. And those calls were like, when I was listening to those, Rebecca, they were so typical of calls that I have listened to through the years in my calls for service too. They are all kind of the same. It's the same scenario. They don't make any sense. And you, as the dispatcher or the officer, whoever's on that 911 call, is taxed with trying to make sense out of what the heck is going on and do we need to send somebody or not.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, because there was one where the dispatcher kept asking, "Where are you? What's the situation?"
Mhm.
And she really couldn't say.
That's right, I've forgotten about that piece, and, yeah, I may have missed part of that, but, yeah, she couldn't say, and again, she was she was obviously clearly intoxicated and not dealing with the situation well at all. So,
But
you
if
have
I
to
were the
factor that in.
911 operator, I might, I hope I'd be as patient, but I might say, "Ma'am, we have other emergencies I need for you to tell me." But they didn't really even do that. They just kinda waited patiently for her to kind of figure it out.
Well, sure, but on the flip side of that, I mean, there's been documented things with 911 calls where if you do suggest to them, like what you just said, we have other calls. I can't stay on this call forever. And then something happens
Yeah, yep,
that, oh my gosh, that department is so liable. That
yeah.
dispatcher can be held so liable, and it's really it's kind of a scary thing because again, they're on the other end of the phone line. The dispatcher is taxed with trying to get all of this information from the person who's ranting and raving into the phone. And if they can't get it and they do hang up and disconnect the call, and like I said, something goes down, it's a big deal.
But don't they we've seen this in other cases where you hear the 911 calls and the dispatchers are snarky or impatient,
Sure.
way more than what I was suggesting, and almost mean to some
Mhm.
degree where you're like, did they go to school for this?" I mean, what? And yet they're not held liable. So I wonder if the standard is high or if, because I haven't heard much of that where a dispatcher has been sued. It's usually when a department, it's the police, what happened when they got out there. So I
Mhm.
wonder if that would be an interesting question for a lawyer, if they're more immune or if there's just certain lines they can't cross, because sometimes you do hear that.
You do, and I think there are certain lines that they can't cross. And I don't really know how to answer that question either, other than you know, they can be if it's deemed that they didn't do their job and that action resulted in a death or a major injury or what have you, and that department is held liable, that dispatcher can totally be named in that lawsuit. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I guess that makes a lot of sense. So moving on in the Sarah Boone case, were you surprised at how quickly the verdict came back?
I was I was surprised. I thought that it would take them a little bit longer. I figured probably 3-hour deliberation, something like that, just throwing it out there. It's oftentimes never a good thing when it comes back that quickly because what it means is that they had a lot to discuss and a lot to consider on both sides of this.
Right.
So when it came back that fast, I realized, okay, it was pretty darn clear to them probably when they went in there to start their deliberations on where they were at with this whole thing. And, they didn't really have a whole lot to deliberate on and discuss because they already kind of had their minds made up. That's kind of
Which
way I
is
took that.
Yeah, I agree, which is really unfortunate. I think fast jury verdicts like that disturb me, even in obvious cases, because it makes me wonder, did they just kinda eat their dinner and say, "Okay, she's guilty, instead of actually going through the evidence, because think about it, both sides put in a lot of time and work and should be given that time as far as to
Hmm.
look through the evidence.
Hmm.
And now I will say there were 6 jurors, so that made it a little faster, and
Sure.
maybe the judge pushing them so late at night made them rush it a little bit. Because remember, it was pretty late by the time they got the case. I think it was, like, after 4 p.m.
It was. I hear what you're saying. I would hope that they would not do that and that they would really look at things that needed to be looked at. But again, I think that in this case, Rebecca, I think the elements were so clear to them and that the videos that they saw were so clear to them. I don't think that it was really that difficult of a decision to where they had to. I don't think it was necessary for them to go into every little piece and every little scintilla of evidence because the elements were met for
But I
second
think they
degree.
owed that to her defense, don't you? Because I think that just think about the time breakdown. Let's say everybody sits down, you
Mhm.
take a vote, and, then you discuss the elements, you look at the evidence, you might eat dinner, you might take a break.
Mhm.
I don't know, I guess I just think there's even with a lot of evidence, I just think you owe it to both sides, and I'm not saying I know one way or the other. If
Uh-huh.
any of the jurors are watching, we'd love to have you on, and so you can tell us, but really, I would say just to look at all the evidence, even if you've seen it before, even if you're like, "I know it," just because remember, they technically, and hopefully they stuck to it, have not been allowed to discuss the case amongst themselves, and so
Right.
it was the first time they were all sitting down together, so you'd think even just hearing everybody's opinions would take a good, say, 40 minutes, not to mention just doing the votes, filling out the paperwork, eating the food.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I don't know if you've ever sat on a jury before. I
No,
did. I did once before I was a police officer. And generally, what happens in these cases and in these deliberations is you go into the room, you select a foreman,
right,
and then you take a vote right then and there. Okay,
right,
who thinks what? Where are we at? And you get a baseline for that, and then you start going down that road of okay, who, if people disagree, why do you disagree? And that's where the discussion of all the evidence comes into play.
right.
My take on it was, and I could be wrong, Rebecca, I wasn't in that room, but my take on it was that probably the majority of them felt like right off the get-go when they took the vote that yeah, we've got some real issues here and she is, in my opinion, guilty. And I think that's why it didn't take that long. I really do. I mean, jurors are human just like anybody else.
But hopefully, I think if I were ever to sit on a jury, just the burden of holding
Mhm.
someone's life and freedom in my hands like that,
Sure.
just it's such a huge burden. I wouldn't just make that decision in 5 seconds because
Mhm.
even if I thought I felt one way, I'd at least make sure I was looking at everything again just to be sure. It because it's such a huge responsibility. I mean, think about the time she could get. I know they're not supposed to consider the sentence, but everyone's thinking about some of that too, I would say.
Sure. No, I agree. And I hear you 100% on your side. I do. I just think that this one was pretty simple. I mean, that's to them, to the jury. That's my opinion on it.
There was a really funny moment after the after the case wrapped up where and there obviously weren't many funny moments, but the prosecutor was walking out and the media was outside and they thought the prosecutor was James Owens. So they started questioning a reporter started questioning the prosecutor about his client. And do you think you did the best you could? What did she think about the plea? And the prosecutor had to stop. It was Will J. He had to stop and he said, "Do you know who I am?"
That's so funny. I missed that piece.
It was
Wow.
after, so it was just extra stuff, but I thought it was hilarious, and then he was like, "Oh, sorry. Oh, okay," and the prosecutor just, like, walked off.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I missed that.
He was like, "I'm the prosecutor, I'm not the defense attorney," like and, maybe they just got a little confused or I understand, maybe if they're not
Sure.
normal trial watchers, but it was just that reporter had to feel so embarrassed.
That's funny. Yeah. That would be kind of an embarrassing moment for sure.
And, you were mentioning before the show, when we were preparing, the
Mhm.
idea that you wanted to talk a little about James Owen's interview that you saw.
Yes. So, I don't really have a lot to say about that. I mean, he was pretty clear that he felt very bad for his client, and that he didn't come right out and say it in the interview today that he had asked her to take a plea, but he was very clear that she was extremely surprised by the verdict, and that he said without question she will probably ask to appeal this. And he was also very clear that he would not be the
Yeah,
person who would handle that, which
right.
I found interesting. So, I mean, I think he did the best he could with what he had to work with for his client. And I
Yes.
really do believe that. And quite frankly, in my opinion, he didn't have a whole heck of a lot to work with.
Yes, you're
And
100% right on that, and
yeah,
all
so
all the
his
people who were oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, that's okay. Go ahead, Rebecca.
All the people who were criticizing him, I just thought they've maybe never been in a trial or I don't know, I was surprised, but I guess defense attorneys get a lot of criticism, but, think about it, he stepped up when no one else would. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
impressed me about him the most. I mean, he knew it wasn't going to be a cakewalk, and yet he said, "I'm here. I'm here to help. If she needs representation, I'm going to do it." And
Yep.
I actually thought that was really noble of him.
I agree 100%. I mean, that is clearly a defense attorney that really believes in the client's right to a fair trial and to a proper defense. And I mean, we've had other defense before you became co-host. We had other defense attorneys on here too, and they've talked about the same thing. It's in the Constitution, and people love to hate defense attorneys and they love to poke fun at them and for defending the client. But the bottom line is, it's in the Constitution, and most defense attorneys will tell you that they are looking at it from that angle,
Right.
as offering a proper defense under the Constitution, doing the best you can for your client. That's the way they have to look at it.
Yes, that's right. And often they will say it doesn't matter in that sense if someone is guilty or not, because they're not looking at it in the way of guilt or innocence, because in fact, I've heard some lawyers say, they if their client wants to tell them, they say, "Don't, no, 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 don't tell me. I'm
Right.
just here to defend you." Because otherwise, if they knew someone was guilty, say a very
Hmm.
particularly cruel murder, they
Hmm.
might say, "Oh, I can't defend this person because of that." So
Yeah.
I think it helps them maintain some of their objectivity.
I think it does too. And it's interesting you said that, because we had Josh Schiffer on. We've had Josh on 3 times now, and he's a very well known defense attorney and a friend of this show. Josh flat said on one of our shows, I forget which one it was, there's sometimes that I don't really want to know if they're guilty, if they did it or not.
Yes.
I need to do my job and factor in things as I need to, but I sometimes don't want to really know.
Also,
So
if they know, let's say someone says, "Yes, I did it," and then the person wants to get on the stand and say, "No, I didn't," as an officer of the court, they can't allow that. So it gets into tricky ethical territory there.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree.
Yes. Are there
Yeah.
any other comments that we missed
I
or
don't know. We still need to just talk briefly on sentencing.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Um,
Thank you for
and I do want
reminding.
to go through some of these. Sorry, guys, we don't have moderators
Oh, are you there?
yet. So
Oh, there.
if we're missing some of your comments, I apologize. We're trying
Yes,
to,
absolutely.
we're both
We
engaged in
sometimes get
conversation. It's
talking,
kind
and
of hard
so
to
that's
keep
why
up.
I brought it up, because I just thought, "Oh, let's see if, we missed any comments."
Yeah,
Throughout that, that were, because all your comments are valuable to us. We appreciate all of you. We appreciated hearing from you guys in the comments on the last video, and just all your helpful feedback. It's always welcomed and appreciated. And I know I said it again, like before, but I'm going to say it again. Your disagreements are always welcome too. So I don't
absolutely.
expect you to agree with me, or you can always push back. So I have a thick skin. So, and I'll continue to say that, just because I want you to know this is a space where that's fine.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yes. So
So
moving to,
yeah,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, that's okay. I think we've covered most of it. It looks like. Yeah, a lot of comments about, it was pretty clear that she was guilty in the chat, people's opinion here, our guest's opinion.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think we've covered
I
it
think we
okay.
were all on the same page by the end of the trial, which I think as a trial watcher is rare. Often you see kind of 50-50, sixty
Mhm.
40, 70-30 splits. And so but this one was one of those where by the end, everybody, I think, agreed. I did not hear anyone say, I did not see anyone say on social media, "Wow, why was she found guilty?" I
Yeah,
didn't see that at all.
I think it was pretty clear too. So now we have to look at sentencing, Rebecca, and what do you think is going to happen on that?
So originally, if you guys remember, we went over this last week, but I'm going to do it again. She was offered that plea of 15 years. And if she would have taken it, she
Mhm.
probably would have been out in, say, 8 years, maybe seven, somewhere around there. And so it would have been an excellent plea for her to take, like Scott mentioned earlier. And yet she did not take it, as we know. So now she faces 22 and a half years to life in prison. I don't think she's going to get life. I don't think this case calls for life. Some will disagree with that. I think she'll probably get about 30 years. That seems fairly reasonable to me. That's a just sentence without being, say, overly harsh, given that I think at sentencing we'll hear about some
Mhm.
extra mental health stuff. We'll hear probably more about the abuse, her family background, some of the mitigating factors that will come in.
Mhm. I think we're on the same page on that because I agree with you. I don't think she'll get life. I do think that, like you said, probably around 30 years, something along those lines, is probably going to be an appropriate sentence handed down by the court. We'll just have to wait and see. I mean, sentencing is December 2nd. And so, again, you never know how it's going to go until you know how it's going to go. But if I was a betting person, I would say she's probably not going to get life on this.
No, because this judge has been pretty fair. I thought once trial started, he was pretty fair and even bent over backwards a little to help the defense because he knew that he was pushing, pushing, pushing hard on them to be prepared. And so extended deadlines, if they didn't have objections and stuff ready, even after he just kind of let it slide. I think the state did some of the same, just
Mhm.
because, again, if you're going to ask defense attorneys to prepare for trial in less than 2 months, you've got to have some leeway.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, I was just looking at a couple more comments. I think Dixie is surprised at 25 years. I think that's what that means.
Dixie, what do you think that the sentence should be? If you want to message us back and chat us back, we'd love to hear from you what you think. And everyone else in the chat, let us know. Like, what do you guys think that the sentence should be? Maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree, but we definitely want to know what you think the sentence should be.
Yeah.
I guess I wonder if, although the sentencing hearing, I think they only scheduled an hour for it, which, again, like everything else in this case, makes it go by fast.
Well, and I think part of it is because there's probably not a lot of people that are going to want to give statements on this. And so, yeah, I think that factors in as well. So I think it
Yeah, I
will.
guess that's true. Wouldn't you think Jorge's family would want to talk a lot more? I guess it's hard to say with victims. Everyone feels differently.
Yeah, I don't really know what to expect from Jorge's family. I know they had to leave the courtroom a number of times because
Yes.
what was happening and what was being talked about was too difficult for them. So,
Understandable.
yeah, understandably, Sonia is talking about Sarah's testifying was not helpful.
Yeah, I agree,
Her
Sonia.
her demeanor totally changed to fake. And she says, saying there'll be victim impact statements, I'm sure. So I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see, you guys. But
But
I
the
don't know. Like
defense
I
says
said,
that they're going to call their battered spouse expert back to the stand, and then I'm sure Sarah will want to speak. And I think if the judge only said an hour for this, Sarah, knowing her pattern,
mhm,
might go on and on and on. So the judge might have to just push push some of his extra things on his schedule back. So it'll be
yeah,
interesting to see if she
mhm,
speaks at sentencing. She could speak and still maintain her kind of innocence. If she, I think she should show some remorse. I'm always surprised when I see that defendants don't show remorse, even if you don't think that it's your fault, even if you could still say, I just feel so bad for what happened.
mhm, mhm. I agree. I think she has to speak in this. I mean, she doesn't have to, but I'm saying if she doesn't, I think it's a mistake because I think she does need to show some remorse and at least try to get it across to the family. Her regrets for what happened. I don't know if she'll do that or not, but I would be pretty surprised if she didn't get up there and at least speak and say some things. I, I mean, that's really kind of one of her only hopes of a lesser sentence, in my opinion.
Do you think that she has any regrets?
I don't know.
It didn't seem like it to me when I watched
It,
her uh,
it,
various interviews. Even
yeah,
on stand, I didn't see any tears. I mean, nothing.
I didn't either, and I would think. I don't know if she has any regrets or not. I don't know if I want to go down that road 100%, but it did not appear to me that she had a lot of regret. It did
I guess
not.
I need to clarify though. I did see something where someone mentioned she said something like he was her soulmate. And
Mm,
so to them, that demonstrated that she really did love him. So you're right. I'm not making assumptions here, just asking the questions. I'm not in her mind. So I don't know. But
mhm,
it just, I would have thought if no matter what, she would have. shed some tears because it's just such a sad and preventable situation. And I think that's what we need to take from this case. I was thinking
Yep.
about the body cam video a little more, and what really moved me in it was at one point the police said to Jorge, "Look, what's going on here? We want to help you too." And he
Right.
burst into tears and he just said, "She's a woman and you wouldn't believe me."
Oh yeah, that was very sad. I agree. I
Mm,
agree. Yeah, it looks like some of the other people here in chat are saying, there was no remorse shown. Lack of remorse was awful. Her narcissism didn't let her feel remorse.
mm.
And again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about very early on. I still believe that she has somehow justified this in her brain that what she did was okay and it was necessary.
Correct. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. And it's also just a something we all know, but I'm just going to say anyways that men can be victims of abuse too. And it doesn't always have to be physical violence, or it can be sometimes, but it can also be verbal or
Hmm.
emotional or coercive. And so if you ever see it, just know that there's no shame in that for men to seek help.
Absolutely. That's a very, very good point. Dixie's just making a comment. I'm uncertain about whether she actually meant to kill him. I don't know, Dixie. I think you
That's
could
fair.
make the. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, somebody else, I forget who it was earlier, also said, I think she may have just gone upstairs and was so drunk that she just fell asleep and forgot he was in there. So
Well, and that's
I
where
don't
I
know.
think the other defense would have been better, right?
Hmm.
Instead of battered spouse, maybe going with, I honestly think, maybe just saying, "I was so drunk, I fell asleep, I didn't
Sure.
know. I was angry in those videos, and it doesn't make me look good, but I'm sorry." I think she could have then gotten a manslaughter conviction, for instance.
I think that there's a point to be made there. I kind of agree with that. And once she went down the battered spouse road, like I said, yeah, I believe that she was a battered spouse, but not that night.
Nothing, yeah.
And that's the problem. That was the whole problem.
Yeah, and then I guess my final thought on this case is this, and that is, can you imagine if she would not have taken those videos and if she would not have talked to police?
Oh my
This
gosh.
would be a whole different case. It probably wouldn't have even been charged. I mean, what would you have said? Like, how do you even come to that conclusion?
Yeah, that was the thing that changed this whole trial was the videos and all the text messages and all those things. And I think she was just so intoxicated that night that she didn't even realize that she gave him the phone.
Yeah, well, and
So,
that's true. I mean, she kept saying there were certain things she remembered, but I was watching Emily, and Emily, was saying that she felt like Sarah didn't remember anything from that night, and she was just
yeah.
going off of what, basically, the police were sort of telling her and stuff like that, and so which may also be true as well, or
Yeah,
just trying to put it together,
I exactly, and I think I kinda misspoke on that when I said she didn't realize that she gave him the phone. I meant to say, I don't think she really realized that she took those videos
right?
because I think she was that intoxicated, and absolutely, that was a game changer.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, we're so glad that you guys
Yes.
joined us today. It's been a wild ride with this case. It's been a difficult case, but we wanted to talk to you guys about it and with you guys about it because it's such a strange case that I hope we never see again.
Yeah, I agree. We have a lot of things coming up that we're going to be talking about down the line. Rebecca and I are going to kind of touch base here in the next few days and kind of get a game plan for what we're going to do in the upcoming episodes. And we really do appreciate you guys supporting us and being here for forensic intent. And we'll be reaching out again real soon and letting you know what's coming up next.
All right. Thanks, guys.
You guys have a great night. Thank you so much. Okay, here we go.